Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to My Favorite Mistake. Our guest today is Ian Small. He's the CEO at Evernote. It's the app that launched a personal productivity movement for knowledge workers around the world. I've heard of it. I'm guessing you have as well, too. But Ian came into the company under his leadership starting in 2018. Evernote found what they describe as the courage to go back to basics, and they launched a new era of innovation for the company to prep for a decade of growth. So you can learn more about them and their products and software at evernote.com. So before I tell you a little bit more about him, welcome to the podcast, Ian. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thanks, Mark, for having me. I appreciate it. This should be a lot of fun.
I think it will be. I'm thinking through Evernote would be helpful for. I'm probably making a mistake in not using it to organize each of these episodes of the things I need to do and keep track of. That seems like certainly a good use for Evernote.
I completely agree. You are making a big mistake in doing that. It might be my favorite mistake of yours.
So now that I've admitted a mistake, we'll get to hear about Ian's. But Ian brings to Evernote and to this conversation more than 25 years of global product technology and business leadership experience. He's trained as an engineer. So his career has evolved from designing and building user experiences at Apple into product leadership and large-scale business management as CEO of TokBox. And he was the global chief data officer for Telefónica SA. In addition to his current role as CEO at Evernote, Ian sits on the board of directors for Lumentum and is an advisory board member for the Alphabet subsidiary Loon, which is a graduate of Google's X Lab. So I'm sure some cool stuff going on there. Ian has a master's degree in computer science and a bachelor's in engineering science from the University of Toronto, and has earned more than 10 patents. So Ian, maybe a different podcast would ask you if you have a favorite patent, but I'm going to ask anyway, real quick. Do you have can you choose a favorite?
I have a patent that everybody in the world runs into on a daily basis.
Oh, what's that?
And that is that if you're looking at your desktop on a PC or a Mac or something like that, and you see an icon of a document, and it's got a miniature version of the document itself in it. Yeah, that's my patent.
That's your patent. Well, my Mac does that. Windows probably does that too now.
Yes, and so
That's awesome.
A long time ago, right? Icons used to be abstractions, and they were just abstract representations of documents. So you knew it was a Word document or a PDF document, or back in my Apple roots, a McDraw document or a McPaint document, but you wouldn't actually know what the document was. And so the idea of giving you a view into the document was new, and that was something I did, I don't know, probably in the late 80s or early 90s when I was at Apple.
Okay. So it was an Apple feature, and these things they get copied and
yes, indeed,
licensed, hopefully.
Well, that's a whole other story. And for this reason, it's either my favorite patent or my least favorite patent, depending.
All right, so let's get into what the main topic of the day here in terms of favorites. Ian, the different things you've done, different stops along the way in your career. What would you say is your favorite mistake?
Well, it was interesting, when you asked me to come on this podcast, I was thinking about all the mistakes I've made, because I've certainly made a lot of them. And I think one of the most far-reaching in terms of how it really changed me was not a single moment where I made a mistake, but it was a habit that I had early in my career. And I'll sum it up as Ian needs to listen better.
Yeah.
And, if I was to go back, and I mean, I don't have them, but if I was to go back and find like my first 5 annual performance reviews that, I received as a engineer in Silicon Valley, every year it would start the same way. Ian needs to learn to listen better. It was like reading the review for a kindergarten student. Ian needs to learn to listen better. He needs to play better with others.
Do you have old report cards? Did it say Ian needs to listen better?
I don't have old report cards either. I'd have to
Yeah.
go. I have to go see if my parents had them in the deep archive somewhere. But
Yeah.
you know, it was just over and over again, year after year after year. Obviously, I wasn't listening well to the advice that I needed to learn to listen better.
And I mean, were there consequences to that other than that write up in the performance review? Did you sort of say, well, okay, yeah, sure. Most everyone can be a better listener. I mean, was it driving any sort of action on your
I mean,
part? Were there any
I think it
consequences?
was. Wasn't really so much that it was driving an action on my part. It was just that my managers at the time could see that I literally wasn't listening as well as I could, and that was holding me back. For me, like the impact really showed up. When I got my first opportunity to manage and to lead a team. And it was a small team, and it wasn't like I had a team of 20 people, and I was not the first job you usually get as a manager.
Mhm,
It was a small team. I was a player coach. I had a big individual contributor role
mhm,
as well as leading the team. Um, but that was a moment when I sort of found out that everything that was working for me as an individual
mhm,
contributor was working against me as a manager. And the biggest thing that was working against me as a manager and leader was not listening to people. And that was, I think, the moment when it like really turned from feedback into a mistake, right?
mhm.
Because
Yeah.
really it was hurting me, it was hurting the team. It was, we weren't getting what we could out of the group of people that I was supposed to be
Yeah.
leading.
And when you say not listening, I mean, was that literally not paying attention or just not taking the input of others? Like not hearing it in a way or saying, well, yeah, I hear you, but no, we're not going to do that.
I mean, I think, honestly, I think my point of view as an individual contributor was I would listen to the first, you know 15 seconds of what someone was saying, and then I would already think to myself, yep, I know that, I've already thought
Mm,
about that, I can stop listening now. It was, it, you know and that was one part of it, and another part of it was, hey, I've already got a great idea.
uh,
Why do I need to listen since I've already got a great idea? um it was a very egocentric point of view, needless to
mhm,
say.
mhm, yeah.
And you know, it it worked okay as a lone wolf engineer. It didn't work so great as a team member, and it certainly started failing me as a manager. And I really had to think about how to overcome that. And the process of doing that really created, for me, what have been really some foundational, I don't know, principles or mantras or beliefs
Mm.
that have guided me as a leader ever since. So this was it was hard to overcome, but it was really formative for me in my career.
So, I mean, I'd like to go back and hear a little bit more about what you did, maybe, to make those adjustments. But this might be the mistake in that it's a leading question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I'm guessing, or it seems like you're a better leader now as a senior leader, as a CEO, from having made that adjustment earlier on. It wasn't a matter of just like, well, I can fight through not listening, and I'm going to succeed anyway. Would you say that adjustment
I would
led
I
to more
would I
success?
would say I wouldn't be in the role that I am in now, and I wouldn't have access to the roles that have defined my career over the last 10 to 15 years if I hadn't learned to overcome this.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I
Well,
think there's only so far you can get in an organization if you are not open-minded, collaborative, and a listener.
yeah. Well, I mean, that's powerful, and I appreciate you being willing to share that, Ian. And I'm curious then, as you I guess had this recognition. I think, as you said, you weren't getting as much out of your team as you could have. What were some of the steps in terms of trying to move forward differently? Did you have to acknowledge, like, was this in the elephant in the room that your team would have also said, given the chance in a 360 review, Ian needs to listen better? How do you move forward from that?
I mean, I think from for me, it was, if I was going to be successful, I needed to, you know, enroll the team in working together, enroll the team possibly in a vision and a plan. I needed to align them, and you know, I needed to get the best out of the team that the team could deliver, and that wasn't always based on what I thought or what I knew. And so listening, was essential if we were going to make the ideas the best ideas we could make. Listening is the first part of being able to align a team around a plan, and aligning a team around a plan is and getting real understanding of where you're going and why you're going there is really, to me, the first part of getting a team to super perform.
Mm,
And so all of those things were sort of important. How did I get there? Well, the solution in theory is easy. Just start listening more.
right.
Of course,
But yeah, in
it's a
reality,
habit, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
a habit you've built in yourself, and you're trying to overcome what is, let's say, in a workplace at that point, probably 5, 10, 15 years of habit that is pretty ingrained, and you need to overcome it. And it's not unreasonable, right? If you're a high performer, um, being the first one in the room to have the answer
Hmm.
is sometimes how you get noticed, right? And
Sure.
and and it's how you drive and develop your career. And so that transition from that's a thing that drives your career forward,
Hmm.
then becomes a thing that can undermine your career as you
Yeah.
move forward, and it's a real challenge. So for me, I needed to create some simple rules for myself, right?
Hmm.
I don't know, talk last, not first.
Yeah.
um, uh, listen so well that listen so well to what other people are saying that you can reframe it back to them in better, crisper terms than they can articulate their own idea,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Listen so well to a group of people that you can aggregate what they are saying into a set of high level observations or proposals or summations when they go, oh, yeah, that is what we're saying.
Yeah.
Like, these are tests you can apply to yourself to say, am I listening? Because if I'm listening, I should be able to do those things. And if, when I repeat back, not the words you said, but the reframing of what you said, either as an individual or as a group, in a way that adds value,
Hmm.
then I'm listening really, really effectively. That's, I'd say, one thing. And
Yeah.
I'd say the second thing is, and it talks to something we talked specifically about before, learn to dismiss nothing. Um,
Mm.
uh, that's actually very, very hard to do because, you know, one of the things that experience is supposed to bring you is patterns, and the more patterns you have to match, the more likely you can take what somebody's saying and jump to match a pattern in your brain, in your experience,
Yeah.
and then accelerate the conclusion of, is this good, bad, does it match, does it not match, etc. And that is truly a value of experience. But the flip side of that positive is a negative, where you can dismiss things really quickly
Hmm.
because they seem to match a pattern that you think is applicable, and then you stop listening. And so I had to learn to dismiss nothing. I had to learn that if I didn't actually understand what someone was saying, I had to try twice as hard to listen
Hmm.
to them to
Hmm.
really understand what they were getting at. I had to assume that what they were saying was valuable and was something that I was missing, so that I would really hear it and really learn it. I think These days, Mark Benioff at Salesforce would call that listening with beginner's mind. That's one of his things. I wasn't smart enough to call it something that graceful. But I would say learning to dismiss nothing was an important part for me of listening more.
Yeah. That phrase, listen with a beginner's mind, is jogging a memory of a very similar phrase that I heard a lot. Paul O'Neill was the CEO of Alcoa, the aluminum manufacturer. He was Treasury Secretary for a couple of years. And then before he passed, was very passionate about healthcare improvement and coaching leaders. And he would frame maybe a similar idea. He would say, you need to learn to ask questions like a third grader, of not being afraid to ask questions that might seem really fundamental to try to get to the core of what's happening here, what's the issue, what's going on. And I think people are afraid to expose that beginner's mind that, this will make me look bad, perhaps.
I think that's true. And I think, simplifying is a real leadership skill, and learning to ask questions like a third grader is a key part of simplifying. And I think that's another dimension of this, absolutely, for sure. And it's actually important to be seen, to be willing to ask questions like that, because it gives other people permission to ask questions like that.
Well, and likewise, as I would celebrate you and others who come on the podcast, Ian, being willing as a leader to admit having made mistakes, I think also sets a very helpful tone for others inside the organization or people younger in their career who would look up to you and say, well, I bet Ian got to where he is because he never made a mistake.
That doesn't work. Working to avoid making mistakes is a fast path to working to have no impact. And if you want to progress in your career, you have to have impact, and to have impact means making choices, and making choices means taking risk. And you're always going to make some wrong. You hope it's not the big ones. You hope the mistakes happen on the smaller things, not the bigger things, but they happen on the bigger things sometimes too. And you learn from all of them. And, I think one of the things that's so interesting about this podcast, and that echoes something that I've said to people for a long time, is, you shouldn't only just learn from your own mistakes. We're all reasonably good at that. But you should watch everything that's happening around you and learn from everybody else's mistakes too.
Yeah, sure.
That's an accelerator.
Yeah. As I wanted to go back and ask, one thing is you were building that new habit, and it can be really hard to change habits. You were trying to build that habit around listening, to follow your rules that you had. Were there early steps that were then reinforcing this new way of operating in terms of seeing benefits that sort of encouraged you that, this is a better path?
I mean, I think there was early kind of, I don't want to say feedback, sounds like somebody wrote it down and put it in a document. I mean, it just worked better. It was clear that it worked better. It was clear that the team was more cohesive. It was clear that we were closer to working with one mind, one shared mind, when I worked harder at listening, instead of just, pointing over the horizon and just say that away. It worked better when we got there and developed those ideas of where to go and why as a team, and that I spent the time engaging with people. And I could feel it as the leader. I could see it in how coherently we were kind of operating and executing, and over time I could see it in the results we were starting to post that we weren't early on.
Well, you've got this list of rules. I mean, a lot of times that could be packaged together in a book. Ian Small's rules for listening and leadership.
I do have one of these days a book I'm going to write about leadership, but it's a little different. It's actually everything I learned about leadership I learned from my dog. because it turns out that a lot of things that if you're going to develop a strong relationship with the canines in your house,
Mhm.
there's a lot of basically good things in there about management and leadership.
Yeah.
And dogs are wonderfully simplifying creatures. So yeah, but we'll see. I'm not really a book author or a professor, so I don't know if that's in my future or
Well,
not.
hey, but hey, that could lead to a better book if it's not too. No offense to the professors out there, if it's not too professorial, that's good. But I mean, I've got to share with you though. I mean, the crazy connection here, the guest, it's and especially since you mentioned the dog, and the guest I'd interviewed recently. Emily Leary is a child therapist, marriage family therapist. She wrote a book. Get this. And the character, it's a children's book. So the lead character is a dog. The book's titled Henry Knows Best, a story about learning from mistakes and listening to others. Like that couldn't be a more perfect lead in to the
That's right.
conversation we're having.
That's absolutely correct.
Little Henry there thought he knew best and he wasn't listening, and eventually had to learn. So maybe one other question though, before we talk a little more broadly about Evernote, in your role now as a CEO or when you've been a senior leader, like do you tend to notice when younger leaders are maybe following in the footsteps of that same mistake? Does that give you an opportunity to try to coach them?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I one of the one of my favorite things to do is actually to spend time with people, helping them work through, their own struggles, their own leadership struggles, their own points in their career where they're having to let go of all the things or of something really foundational to them that has made them successful,
Mhm.
which is now sabotaging them. And it amazes me how often I see that pattern repeat itself of something that has made someone successful as an individual contributor or early in their career. Finding that thing is now fundamentally in their way. I And the challenge of letting go of it. It's really scary to do, right? To let go of. I mean, if you are having a successful career, to let go of something that has made you successful to this point in order to take the next leap is literally, like swinging through the jungle on a vine and letting go of a vine before you've got hold of the next one.
Yeah.
And it's hard to do. And so, yeah, I absolutely see this happen.
Mhm.
And I love working with people to help them get through those things.
Yeah. So how close of a parallel is there then to the Evernote story of rebuilding everything from scratch? Was everything that had led Evernote to be successful up to that point in a different way, getting in the way of the next decade of success?
I mean, in some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. I think the biggest challenge at Evernote, when I got there was that the company was a bit stuck, and in order to figure out what to do about that, yeah, I needed to listen, and in this case,
Mhm.
I needed to listen to sort of three um, three groups of people or three constituencies. Obviously, the customers, that's an important constituency to listen to, the
Mhm.
employees, the team at the company, and then the board or the investors, however you want to think about them. Because
Right.
as a CEO, if you're going to lead a company through some kind of change, you need to have those three constituencies on board and aligned. And the best way to do that is to start by listening to them and
Yeah.
to hear from them what they think the problem was. And I think what was interesting was everybody uh, zeroed in on the same they expressed it in different ways, but they zeroed in on the same root cause, was that the company was really struggling with innovating and struggling with being able to move the product forward, and we wanted to be able to fix that, and that was and having the courage and having the permission to go ahead and undertake something that was as large as the sort of rebuild that we undertook really, required listening to those constituencies, and by listening to them, earning, their permission to respond to the things that they had each talked about in their own ways.
Yeah.
And I think that was a very successful process at Evernote. It wasn't easy. It was on a grand scale. It's not like getting 5 people in a room and listening to them when you have millions of users and hundreds of employees and
Right.
and a lot of investors. But it's the same problem writ on a much larger scale.
Yeah.
And I think we were very successful in taking that approach, and in really taking the company through a 2-year process, which is a long process for employees. It's a long process for investors. It's a long process for customers.
Yeah.
To really reinvent Evernote, and transform it into the application that it is today, and on the path that it is now.
Yeah. So would you say, was the issue, it sounds like Evernote was hearing what people were saying, but we're just stuck in being able to take that leap to let go of one vine and move forward? Or was there still a need to really improve the processing of what was being said to then move forward?
What I would say is, I think everybody knew, but no one was listening.
Mm.
Do you know the difference between those things? It's like what Sherlock Holmes, didn't he used to say to Watson, "Oh, you saw, Watson, but you did not observe." And it was, I think everybody knew, but the jump from knowing to really listening, and then the jump from listening to being willing to undertake what would be required, were kind of the 2 parts that hadn't really quite come together.
It
And
seems like
when I remember when I announced to the employees, to the team at an all hands, that we were going to go down this path, and there was a combination of delight and disbelief, right? Delight because it's like, oh, look, he's really listening. And disbelief because sort of like, yeah, no one would actually do this. This is not actually going to last. In 6 months, he's going to change his mind. And we just didn't do that. We just stuck with it. And it wasn't easy, but we got through it. And now, we've been on the other side for 2 years. We've been innovating in the market, leading, shipping new capability, really taking Evernote from a world in which we were all about note taking and knowledge management to one in which we're embracing a slightly larger piece of productivity, and all in response to what customers tell us they're doing with the product. So we're still listening, but we're just now listening, and being able to take new kinds of actions that we couldn't take before.
So what I hear you saying is that there were changes to maybe sort of the scope of what people wanted or expected to be able to do in Evernote, and then there was also a need, and I'm not that technical, but did the code have to be rewritten from scratch to be on a more forward-facing technology platform or language?
Short answer, yes. We for a number of reasons, the code base had aged, and was constraining us from moving forward. And there was functionality we tried to ship several times and being unable to ship it because of the constraints of the existing code base. and it's now functionality we've shipped today successfully on the new code base. And so, that's it. Really is trying to respond to what people tell us they were doing with the software, and trying to get the software to do that better, but then discovering that we were hamstrung by our existing architecture and some of the decisions we've made over the previous 10 years from actually being able to move forward. And that was what we needed to fight through. There is an hour-long technical podcast in here about what we actually did and how we did it. We probably shouldn't do that now, but yeah.
Right. No, somebody else is better qualified to ask good questions about that. But I mean, I think, that facing that scenario, it seems like, there are times mistakes of inaction. If trying to get let's ride it out a couple more years before we decide to re-architect, there could have been that mistake. Was there any way in making that decision to move forward at that time in that way? Could have been a mistake. I'm just curious, as a CEO, how do you think through, here's what we expect to happen, here are risks in terms of it might not play out?
I think it was absolutely there's no question it was a high risk decision to take the decision that we took. It would have been easier and simpler to see if we could kick the can down the road for 2 years.
Yeah.
But also it wasn't going to get us anywhere. And so that was fundamentally at a board level the conversation of, well, what are we trying to do here? Are we just trying to survive, or are we trying to grow and become what we really believe that we can be as a company? And if we want to truly follow the vision of the company, and we really want to try to execute against this mission that we have, the vehicle that we are in is not fit for purpose anymore, and we need to do something about it. And that was really, and we unfortunately, reached the point where we could no longer do this incrementally. That was the real challenge. That we could no longer bite this off a piece at a time. We had to bite off the whole problem, and that was, more than likely because some number of times, I mean, I don't know, I wasn't there, I wasn't at the company, but I would guess some number of times it's like, we'll just defer that for 2 years, and you do that enough times, and then you end up in the place we were.
Yeah. So as you were moving forward with that reinvention, I think there's a Silicon Valley mantra that's kind of related to this podcast, maybe: fail fast, fail often. Was there a process of, as you're moving forward with this risky plan, to make sure that you were learning, adjusting as you went?
I mean, unfortunately, no, because if you're going to re-platform, you can't actually do it a little piece at a time. You have to try and take the whole thing with you. It's one of the reasons why it is so risky, is because it tends to be a little bit of a big bang approach. That's not what you want, but it's how it works. And so we needed to move as much of the product as we could over onto a new platform, and then go from there. And I think, I think there's no question that we took our users through a bit of a difficult ride. And there were a couple of moments we didn't do things nearly as well as we should. But when I look at where we are now, and where customer sentiment is now, and where product velocity is now, and the kinds of things we're able to do now, we're able to move in incremental steps, test, iterate, learn, test, iterate, learn. And, that's just, we weren't able to do that before. And so that's, we've gotten ourselves to the place where that mantra can be correct. I think I think failing fast is good, and I think that I think it's an important mantra because it indicates that failing is not actually a problem.
Mm-hmm.
But I prefer to focus on, on iterate and on iterating faster, because I think some failures are actually avoidable if you actually stop and thought about them for a bit up front. And so, it's gone from something that's important because it creates permission to fail to something that maybe glorifies failure more than it should.
That's a whole different conversation, maybe around finding that balance here in other cases. So, Ian, before we wrap up here, just one follow-up question to the reboot story. Do you anticipate, in some year, 2030, 2035, that there would be, is this inevitable that there would be the need for another reboot, or can you guide the ship in a way where that big risk, that big reboot can actually be avoided?
I don't think it should be necessary to do that. I don't see that as a inevitable future. I think it requires, a balance as you look at how you run any technology company, a balance of, investing in ongoing maintenance and ongoing modernization, while you are also developing, the product and solving user problems. I think as long as you maintain those things in balance, whatever modernization you might need to do, and there's no question that over the course of 10 years there will be things to be modernized, you can do those things, while the plane is flying, as opposed to having to land the plane and switch out all the engines and take off again. And I think that's really, really the way one tries to run product and technology businesses. And so, no, I don't see it as an inevitable future, not at all.
Okay, well, good. So again, our guest has been Ian Small, CEO of Evernote. You can learn more about them, Evernote.com. Final question for you here. And, Evernote, in past experience using it, it's a very flexible platform for you to figure out how it works for you. So, are there mistakes that users would make, or is that just not possible?
I think the thing about Evernote, which is fantastic, is that it really, really, can be shaped to the way that you want to work. And so I think the biggest mistake, really, that a user can make with Evernote is to think that there is a right way. There is only your right way with Evernote, and the fact that we don't force you into a particular way of doing things, is a real strength of the product. It puts a little more responsibility onto the shoulders of the user, but it allows us to be a product with a reach of millions of users because we don't insist on one way of seeing the world and one way of doing things. Your way. There's a reason that our users don't call it Evernote; they call it My Evernote. And that's because it is all about the way they want to work and the way that they want to get through their day.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that, and appreciate you being willing to share your favorite mistake story, Ian, and more importantly, what you've learned, how you've progressed through your career. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it. It's been a great time.
Oh, good. Thanks.